I didn't come here to be seen. That was never the plan. After everything that happened back east, I wanted silence. I wanted space. I wanted to disappear under a big sky where no one knew my name. So I chose the desert, a little town called Saguaro Creek. One gas station, one church, and a post office that still uses the rubber stamp. You blink, you miss it. Perfect. I moved into a dusty rental house on the edge of town. It came with two things I didn't ask for: creaking floorboards and an open view of the mountains. No neighbors, no noise, just wind, dust, and stars. Exactly what I needed. But the first time I walked into the town grocery store, I felt it. That shift. I hadn't even touched the cart yet, just stepped through the sliding glass doors, and suddenly the air got heavier. Not warm, not hostile, just different. A man by the apples looked up, then down. A kid dropped his juice box. Two women near the bread aisle whispered, but not to each other. They were whispering about me, and I hadn't said a word. I stood there pretending to check the tomatoes. But I wasn't looking at produce. I was reading the room. No one greeted me. No one smiled. But everyone noticed. Not because of my clothes, not because I was new. It was something else. Something deeper. Something I couldn't explain, not then, but I felt it. The way some people stiffened, others subtly moved aside. I wasn't loud, I wasn't flashy, I was just me. And apparently that was already too much. I paid for my groceries in cash. The teenage clerk barely made eye contact, but just as I reached for my receipt, she said something under her breath. So quiet, I almost missed it. "You got that energy?" I paused. "What?" She blinked, as if waking from a dream. "Nothing. Have a good one." Outside, the wind kicked up. Sand swirled around my boots like it was dancing just for me. I got in my car and drove home, groceries rattling in the back seat, heart even louder in my chest. What had she meant? That energy. I'd heard things like that before. Back in New York, when I worked as a trauma counselor, clients often said being around me made them feel seen, sometimes too seen. One woman once told me, "It's like you can hear the thoughts I don't say," but I never meant to disturb anyone. Still, it was happening again, and this time I wasn't in a therapy office. I was in a quiet town with people who didn't know my past, didn't know my training, didn't know the hours I'd spent in stillness just trying to rebuild. And yet, my presence was already saying things I hadn't spoken out loud. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and watched the sky catch fire with color. Sunset here wasn't like back east. There the light got swallowed by buildings. Here it stretched raw and uninterrupted. The breeze was warm, but the silence felt louder than it should. I closed my eyes, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not human. I looked down. A stray dog stood by my porch. Big gray. Gentle eyes. He didn't bark, didn't move, just stood there looking at me. Then slowly, he lay down, right at my feet. I didn't call him. I didn't offer food. I hadn't even reached out. He just trusted me. That was the first night. The next morning, there were 2 more dogs. By week's end, I had birds nesting under my roof and a wild rabbit that refused to leave the flower bed. I wasn't feeding them. They just came, drawn to something I hadn't fully accepted about myself yet, my energy. It moved before I did. It spoke louder than words, and apparently it carried a frequency that nature heard first. People, though, people reacted differently. A few days later, I went back to the store. The same teenage clerk glanced up and quickly looked away. No more small talk, just ringing up items like her fingers couldn't move fast enough. Behind me in line, a woman sighed dramatically and stepped into another aisle. I felt like a ghost wrapped in fire. Not seen, felt too deeply, too quickly. Back home, I found myself journaling obsessively, trying to unpack it all. Why was my silence so loud to them? Why did I stir things I never touched? And then I remembered something my mentor once said: "Your aura arrives before your body does." Back then, I'd nodded politely, thinking it was poetic nonsense. Now I wasn't so sure. Something about this place, about being stripped of distractions, was revealing parts of me I'd learned to suppress in the city, in therapy rooms, in relationships. Here, I couldn't hide, and neither could anyone else around me. By the end of my first week in Saguaro Creek, I had no friends, but I had visitors uninvited, silent visitors, a hawk that perched on my roof every morning, a neighbor's kid who wandered into my yard without a word and just sat beside me, and energy. Always that energy. Thick, present, unmistakable. Was it power? Was it intuition? Or was it simply what happens when someone finally stops pretending I didn't have answers? Not yet. But deep inside, I felt something shifting, not in the town, in me. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to be a quiet retreat after all. Maybe I wasn't here to disappear. Maybe I was here to disturb. And I hadn't even begun. You can always feel it before it's said. That edge in someone's voice, the slight delay when they answer, the forced smile that flickers too fast. It's not rudeness, it's resistance. And here in Saguaro Creek, I was starting to feel that everywhere I went. At first, I thought it was just the adjustment. Small towns move on their own clock. Outsiders are background noise until they prove otherwise. But this was different. It wasn't just that people didn't know me. It was like they didn't want to. Still, I needed to work, not for the money exactly, but for the grounding, for the rhythm of showing up and offering something that meant something. So when I found a notice on the bulletin board at the co-op, local grief counselor wanted Saguaro Wellness, I called the owner. Donna answered herself. She had the kind of voice that sounded like chamomile in control, smooth, steady, polite. She said they'd been hoping to expand their services beyond herbal consultations and breathwork trauma support. She admitted was something too many people didn't want to talk about, but needed. I started the next Monday. The room they gave me was small but warm. Old wooden floors, a salt lamp that hummed gently in the corner. I brought in my own chair, wide and grounded with soft arms, the kind that said, "You're safe here." I lit a candle every morning. Same scent, same routine, my version of a threshold. I thought I was ready, but I forgot something. I forgot what happens when people meet someone who sees through them too quickly. My first client was a man named Rick, mid-50s rancher. Wore his pain in the slope of his shoulders and the stiffness in his jaw. He didn't want to sit, just paced. When I finally got him to breathe, he told me about his son, died 5 years ago. Accident on the highway. Rick blamed himself, and he said it like he was describing the weather. I didn't interrupt, didn't advise. I just sat with him. When the silence came, I looked at him, not through him, not past him at him, and said, "You've been carrying that guilt, like it's keeping him alive." His lips twitched. Then he stood up and left. No goodbye. No next appointment. Just gone. That was the first session. By the end of the week, I'd seen 7 people. Only 2 returned. One woman cried so hard in the second session, she threw up in the trash bin and then apologized as if her body had betrayed her. Another stared at me for what felt like minutes, then said, "I don't know what it is about you, but I feel naked in here." I nodded gently. "It's okay," I said, but it wasn't okay. Not for them, they wanted help, but they didn't want to be seen. And that's the line no one talks about. The one between healing and exposure. The rumors started quietly. At the co-op, someone left a flyer on the counter with a big red X through my face, just a grainy photo from my LinkedIn. No name, no context. The message was clear. She's not one of us. At the diner, the waitress who once poured me coffee with a smile now barely met my eye. My coffee came cold, and then came the moment that changed everything. Her name was Camille, mid-40s, high cheekbones, a reputation for being the real heart of the town. She came to me quietly late one afternoon right before closing. Her eyes were tired, but her makeup was perfect. We talked for almost an hour, about her father's death, about how grief doesn't always cry. It sometimes curdles into bitterness and distance. Near the end, I said something simple, something I'd said to dozens of clients over the years. You don't have to carry his secrets with you. That's not love. That's loyalty to pain. She froze. Something in her cracked, just for a second. Tears welled, but didn't fall. She stood up, thanked me, and left. That night there was a town council meeting. I wasn't there, but word traveled. Camille stood up and said I was dangerous, said I was digging too deep, that I was pulling apart families under the guise of therapy. By morning, 3 clients canceled. One woman called the wellness center and said she wouldn't step foot in the building while I was still there. Dana didn't say much, just pursed her lips and handed me a list of availability for future weeks. Future as in, not now. I got the message. I sat on my porch that night with the dog at my feet and my mug in hand. The stars above looked the same, but something inside me didn't. I didn't regret what I said, but I was starting to question why it always ended up like this, why people wanted to heal but only on their terms, why my silence unsettled more than soothed. And then it hit me. It wasn't about me, it was about them. Their shadows, the parts of themselves they'd buried so deep they forgot they were even carrying them. And the second someone comes along who holds up a mirror who says, I see that they panic, they run, or worse, they retaliate. The next day, I walked past Camille on Main Street. She didn't say anything, but her eyes, they held something between regret and rage. And in that moment, I realized something else. This town. It was holding on to something much darker, something unspoken. It wasn't just individual pain. It was shared denial, a collective agreement to keep quiet about whatever happened here long ago or not so long ago. And my presence, it was cracking the silence, just by existing. I didn't stop counseling. I just stopped calling it that. When people came, I welcomed them. I made tea. I listened. But I didn't offer sessions anymore because I knew, now, sometimes your aura isn't meant to comfort, sometimes it's meant to disturb, and for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that. Some silences are heavy, others are holy. By my 3rd week in Saguaro Creek, I was starting to tell the difference. I'd stopped going to the wellness center. I no longer tried to explain my background to strangers or justify the way I made people uncomfortable. I just lived. I kept to myself mostly, but still they came. Not the townspeople, not the council members or church ladies who side-eyed me at the diner. It was the children, the animals, and the wind. That might sound strange, but once you stop pretending not to notice the way life responds to you, it becomes impossible to unsee. It started with a toddler. I was sitting on the bench outside the co-op, just sipping my iced tea and watching the sky shift into its late afternoon gold. A woman stood nearby, arguing quietly with someone on her phone, her daughter clinging to her leg. The little girl had big eyes and a scraped knee. When she saw me, she blinked and let go of her mother. Just like that. She walked over silent and sat beside me on the bench. Didn't speak. Didn't smile. Just was. Her mom didn't even notice. We sat like that for minutes. 2 strangers, 1 old soul and 1 healing one, until the girl placed her tiny hand on mine. And when she did, I felt it. The pulse. The peace. Like we'd both found something we didn't know we were looking for. Then she slid off the bench, toddled back to her mom, and never looked back. That night I lit a candle and sat on the floor by the window. The same stray dog still slept by my porch, but now he had company. A calico cat I'd never seen before curled next to him. A bluebird fluttered on the sill. Even the wind had changed. It didn't howl. It whispered, and I swear it felt like the desert was exhaling around me. A few days later, I met Miguel. He came to trim the overgrown mesquites on the property next to mine. Tall, lean, wore a canvas jacket even in the heat. Tattoos peeked from under his sleeves, and his eyes. They carried something I recognized. A storm, long held at bay. He didn't speak much the first day, just nodded. But on the second day, he asked if I wanted my front path cleared. I'm already out here, he said. I agreed. As he worked, I watched the way his shoulders moved, tense, controlled. But every now and then, his gaze would drift just for a second toward the quiet around my porch, toward the peace. That afternoon, he sat on my steps, sweaty and dusty. I don't usually talk to people, he said without looking at me, but this place, it doesn't feel like other places. I handed him a glass of water. It's not the place, I said. It's the presence. He nodded slowly. Yours? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Over the next week, he kept showing up. Sometimes to work, sometimes just to sit. Once he brought me tamales wrapped in foil and said nothing as he placed them on my kitchen counter. Another time he built a fire pit in my yard without asking, said I needed one. But it wasn't until the 5th visit that the shift happened. We were watching the sun drop behind the rocks, the flames crackling low. I used to have panic attacks every night, he said. My head turned, but I stayed silent. Afghanistan, he continued. The noise never left. I'd wake up and think I was still there, couldn't be near people, couldn't even hear certain songs. His voice cracked then, just a little. But here around you, it's like my nervous system forgets to panic, like it lays down for once. I swallowed hard because I knew that feeling too. He looked at me, eyes glassy, jaw tight. You don't even have to say anything, he whispered. You just... Or I felt something swell in my chest. Not pride, not comfort. Recognition, the kind that says you're not alone anymore. That night, he stayed a little longer. We didn't speak much, but there was no need. Sometimes healing doesn't happen in conversations. It happens in shared stillness. It happens when two people sit beside their own shadows and don't flinch when the other does too. From then on, Miguel became part of my rhythm. He'd stop by after jobs, bring over old books or fresh tortillas. Sometimes we'd garden in silence. Other times we'd walk down the dusty road together, letting our steps sync with the stillness. I never asked about his past again. He never asked about mine. But we both knew we were walking memory fields, and somehow the quiet between us kept them from detonating. One afternoon, I stepped barefoot into the backyard and saw something that stopped me cold. A row of cactus flowers had bloomed overnight, out of season, out of sync with nature. But there they were, vibrant, open, unapologetically alive. I dropped to my knees beside them, palms hovering above the petals. They pulsed faintly beneath my hands, like they knew me, like they had been waiting, and for the first time in weeks I said it out loud. I think I'm supposed to be here. Because it wasn't just the children or the animals, it wasn't just Miguel, it was the land, the roots, the stillness beneath the noise. Everything was responding not to what I said, but to what I held inside. And maybe that's what a true aura is. Not the light you project, but the frequency you carry when you stop performing. The town still avoided me. Camille still wouldn't meet my eyes. People still crossed the street to avoid a hello. But now, it didn't sting. Because I had proof I wasn't wrong. The bluebird on my windowsill, the toddler on the bench, the calm in Miguel's chest, the flowers blooming out of time. They were all saying the same thing. Keep going. There's a different kind of silence in the desert at dawn, not empty, not cold. It's the kind that listens, the kind that leads. That morning, I woke up with the wind whispering through the screen door, and for the first time since I'd arrived in Saguaro Creek, I heard it call me. I couldn't explain it, I just knew something wanted me to follow. So I did. I left my tea untouched, pulled on my boots and let my feet guide me, past the prickly pear, past the rusted gate beyond the gravel road that ran toward the mountains. The path wasn't marked, but the pull, it was unmistakable. About a mile out I saw it, the old chapel, weather-beaten, half-sunken, a wooden cross barely hanging on the roof, its edges blackened from either time. Or something else. No one had mentioned this place, no signs, no markers, just a hushed kind of sacred. And as I stepped closer, I felt the temperature drop. Not the kind of cold that comes from shade or wind. It was a stillness, a heaviness, like something buried was watching me. I pushed the warped door open. The hinges groaned. Inside, broken pews lay scattered like fallen soldiers. Dust particles floated like spirits in the shafts of early light. The altar was cracked, but strangely clean, like someone had been there recently. Then I saw her. Sitting in the last row, barely moving, a teenage girl, long dark hair, worn flannel shirt, hands resting in her lap like she was waiting for a verdict. She didn't flinch when she saw me, didn't speak either, just looked right into me. "Hey," I said gently, not moving any closer. "Didn't mean to scare you." She blinked. "You didn't." Her voice was soft but steady. I stepped forward a little, sat a few pews ahead, sideways so she could see me clearly. "You come here often," she shrugged. Sometimes. When it's quiet, I nodded. You live around here? Sort of. Silence again, but not awkward, not tense. It was a silence I recognized, the kind that holds more truth than any conversation ever could. I left that morning without pressing her, didn't ask her name, didn't offer mine. Somehow we both knew this wasn't a one-time meeting. Over the next few days I went back. Sometimes she was there, sometimes not. But when she was, we'd sit, talk a little, watch the dust dance in the sunlight. She told me her name was Lila, that she lived with her uncle's church family on the other side of the hills. The way she said it made my stomach tighten. Something was off. Her stories didn't match. Her eyes flickered every time I asked a question that got too close. But it wasn't just her answers. It was her face, familiar in a way that rattled me. One afternoon she pulled a necklace from under her shirt, a tarnished silver charm, an owl with wings spread wide. I froze, because I'd seen that necklace before years ago on my sister. Her name was Rachel. She died when I was 25. A car crash. But before that, her life had been chaos. Custody battles, courtrooms, addiction running from one state to another. She had a daughter. But no one knew what happened to the girl after the crash. Her ex took her, changed their names, disappeared into some ultra-religious circle. The system lost track. We thought she was gone, but now, here she was in a forgotten chapel, calling herself Lila, wearing my sister's necklace. I didn't ask that day, didn't press. But when I got home, I paced until midnight, then pulled out the one photograph I had left Rachel, her baby girl, and that owl charm hanging from her mother's neck. It was her. Lila was my niece, and she didn't even know. The next time I saw her, I brought a photo. Just one. No words. No pressure. I placed it on the pew between us. She looked down, then up, and her face crumbled. I don't remember her, she whispered. But I remember that necklace. I remember someone singing me to sleep with a raspy voice and calling me Bug. That was Rachel's name for her. My eyes stung. I think I said softly, "You've been running with someone else's story." That was when everything changed. The next day I drove out to the address Lila had mentioned. A compound, not a house, not a family. It was structured, fenced, controlled. The man who opened the gate wore a white button-up pressed too tight and a plastic smile. "Can I help you? I'm here to speak with Lila." He blinked. "There's no one here by that name." I didn't argue, just nodded and left, but in my gut I felt it. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, this was a containment, a system built to keep certain truths buried, and my presence. It was cracking the walls. That night, a rock was thrown through my window. No note, just the sound of shattering glass and a whisper of warning on the wind. Miguel found me sweeping up the shards. He didn't say much, just helped clean, then stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and said, "You need to be careful." "I can't walk away," I told him. "She's my sister's daughter. She doesn't even know who she is." Miguel didn't flinch, but his jaw set. "You're shaking the wrong foundation, Ava." "I didn't ask to." "No," he said, "but you were born to." The next time I saw Lila, her eyes were red. "They said, I can't come anymore," she whispered. "They said you're dangerous." I took her hand. "You know that's not true." She nodded, but her voice cracked as she said, "Please don't leave me here." And that was the moment. The one where I knew hiding was no longer an option. I could run, or I could rise, but I couldn't do both. There's a moment before a storm hits where the sky forgets to breathe. That's what it felt like inside me the morning I decided to stop running. Not from people, not from whispers, but from myself. The version of me that thought peace was found in silence, that safety came from shrinking. But safety's a myth when the truth has teeth and mine. It was finally done. Playing dead. Miguel stood at my kitchen counter, arms crossed, waiting for me to back down. "I'm going to the town meeting," I told him again. "You sure about that?" I nodded. "They've built their comfort on a lie. I can't keep walking around pretending I don't see it." He took a long breath, then reached for my car keys. "Then I'm driving." That night, the rec center was full. Folding chairs, sweaty brows, cheap coffee in white styrofoam cups. People avoided my eyes as I walked in. Some shifted in their seats. Others stared straight ahead as if refusing to acknowledge I was even real. But I was real, and I was done being anything less than that. The council started with zoning updates and road repairs, but the tension was thick. They knew why I was there. And when the floor opened for public comment, I stood. Just one step forward, and the room dropped 10 degrees. I held up a picture, my sister Rachel, holding baby. Lila. Most of you don't know who this is, I said, but she's family. Blood. She died running from a man who stole her child. Gasps, murmurs, shuffling feet. I found that child. She's been living right here in this town under a false name in a group that calls itself a church but functions like a cage, someone shouted. This isn't the place for your drama. But I didn't flinch. This is the place, I said, because it happened here, and silence doesn't protect children. It protects the people who hide them. The room cracked. Voices rose. People barked at each other. Some stood to leave, but others leaned in. Their faces changed, eyes widened. Truth has that effect. Miguel stepped beside me and said one line, quiet, steady. She's telling the truth. That was it. No speech, no theatrics. Just a man who once hid behind his own pain stepping into the light, and something in the room shifted again. The next 48 hours were chaos. Some townsfolk rallied behind the cult, insisting I was a liar, a manipulator, an emotional terrorist. But others came forward. A girl who escaped 5 years ago and had never spoken a word about it. A boy whose parents had tried to pray the demons out of him when he wouldn't conform. Stories poured out like water after a cracked dam. And through it all, I kept showing up. Calm, clear, unapologetic. Lila was taken into protective custody. She stayed with me while things settled. I watched her rediscover music, quiet laughter, the kind of freedom that most people take for granted until it's taken from them. She never called me aunt, but one night sitting on the porch under the stars, she whispered, "I think my mom would have liked you." And I smiled. She did. I said a lot. The cult was investigated, disbanded officially. It was a voluntary closure, but people in this town knew better. They just didn't say it out loud, and me, I stayed. I bought a plot of land just outside the canyon, built a small, quiet retreat, adobe walls, big windows, meditation spaces under the sky. I called it the Echo House, because that's what I'd become, a living echo of truth, of presence, of everything. People tried to silence, but couldn't. People came from all over. Women burned out from city life. Veterans like Miguel looking for somewhere they didn't have to flinch. Even a couple who drove all the way from Beverly Hills in a Tesla just to feel the energy they'd read about online. And the energy, it never left. If anything, it grew. Stronger. Softer. More certain. One day, a journalist showed up, said he was doing a series on alternative healing and high-frequency living. He'd heard about me through a Wall Street Journal feature on wellness disruptors. At first, I laughed, me a disruptor. But then I looked around, at the people who sat in silence on my land and cried without knowing why, at the hawk that now circled above the chapel I'd helped restore, at Lila planting sage in the garden and humming her own songs, and I thought, yeah, maybe that's exactly what I am. I don't dim anymore. I don't apologize for the way rooms shift when I walk in. Let them whisper, let them stare. I'm not here to be understood, I'm here to be felt. Because your aura isn't just about glow, it's about gravity. It's the way silence hangs heavier after you speak. The way people rearrange themselves when you stop playing small. It's the mirror you hold without saying a word. And if that disturbs them, let it. I was never meant to blend in. I was born to stir what's asleep, to light fires in rooms where no one wanted heat, to make peace feel like a revolution. And if that unsettles people, that's their invitation to rise. So when strangers ask me now what I do, I don't say I'm a counselor or a healer. I say I'm a reminder of who they really are and who they're afraid to be. Some days I still get hate mail, an anonymous letter, a warning left under my door, but I smile, because if the truth didn't sting, it wouldn't be real. And I didn't come here to comfort illusions. I came to crack them wide open. And in case you're wondering, yes, people still stare, but now I stare right back.